Hi guys, this is a video tutorial that shows you how to allow Photoshop to anticipate what your image will look like before it prints. That way you don't have any unexpected color shifts or issues when it goes to actually printing. We want to make it very specific, including color profiles and proof setups that prepare your images for a particular printer. The other thing we're going to do is work with some bracketing techniques that allows us to create the very best possible image. First thing that you'll want to do is create a folder either on your desktop or wherever you're working to collect a bunch of different images because we're going to create multiple images from the same photo with different adjustments attached to them. So a couple of things that we're going to do. We're going to use Photoshop and Bridge. We're going to um, create a proof setup environment in Photoshop in order to better anticipate the final produced version, printed version of whichever photos that we're working with. Now remember, we're going to want to create 8 by 10 or 10 by 8 photos at the highest resolution possible, um, and we want them to be able to fit really nicely into our pre-cut mats and frames and things like that. So this is just going to help us um, anticipate what we can expect out of the printer. So you'll take your image, you'll make sure that it's cropped 8 by 10, and you want to make sure that you're maintaining the highest possible resolution. Now that's almost at an 8 by 10. I'm going to make sure that if it's really close, I'm not going to lose too much of the image area, but I don't want it to be anything less than 8 by 10. So if the image area is right at 8 by 10, then I know I'm not going to have any little lines peeking out when I go to fit this into a pre-formatted or pre-cut mat board. All right. Now I'm assuming that you've already gone through the monitor calibration that I had provided for you earlier today. You'll want to make sure that you calibrate your monitor just so it looks as good as it possibly can. Everybody's eyes are a little bit different, so what we're trying to do is make sure that our images aren't going to change dramatically when they actually get printed. Because the printing is always going to be a slight bit duller. It's not going to be as sharp and as bright as it is on screen, so all we can do is adjust our screen to anticipate what kind of output we're going to have. That way we can adjust our images and know that the printed image is going to look a lot like that one. Okay, enough talk about it. Let's get started. One of the first things I like to do is go up to View, and usually you have a working CMYK by default. You want to make sure that our images, since we are preparing for print, we want to make sure that our images are set in CMYK. Then we can make some adjustments. You don't want to make all of your adjustments before converting it to CMYK because it's going to shift a little bit. So go ahead and start with a CMYK image. Usually out of your cameras, your images are in RGB mode, so you'll have to shift those to a CMYK mode, or convert them, I should say. In the menu bar, you have under View, you have Proof Setup. We're going to create a custom proof setup since we're working with an Epson printer. The Epson in our classroom needs to have a certain proof setup profile. So the one that's closest to the one that we have is this 3170. You'll want to select that one. Notice that the image has already changed quite a bit. That's because the image is trying to show you what the print is going to look like. Alright, so we see that the color profile for the proof setup is already loaded. We're in CMYK. It's an 8-bit image. Want to make sure that your layers palette is open, because the next thing that we want to do is bracket some of the settings. Remember, we're only using brightness and contrast for our settings in this class. So what you'll want to do is go up to Layer, create a new adjustment layer for brightness and contrast, and this one I'm going to call it brightness, or maybe just bright, and then I'll do plus 10. And then what I'll do is increase the brightness on this one to 10. You don't want to make any adjustments more than 10. 10 units, because those increments, if you need to adjust your images more than that, you should probably reshoot, or you should consider another image for your final print. Because if you really need to do a bunch of post-production work, it just means it's not a great image to start out with. Alright, so now we have an adjustment layer that shows us if we increase the brightness by an increment of 10, this is what we'll get. We'll also want to do, we might want to see what it looks like at a minus 10. It's important that you label these layers. You always want to label your layers appropriately so you know what you're looking at. So all I'm doing, I'm not doing anything with the contrast. It's a brightness of minus 10. So what you're seeing now, because both adjustment layers, if both adjustment layers are on, they cancel each other out. So you're essentially seeing the real image. So if you want to see what the image looks like with a brightness of minus 10, you got to hide that plus 10 first. If you want to go back and see the plus 10, you got to hide the minus 10. Alright, so we have an original image. We have the image with a brightness of plus 10, and then the image with a brightness of minus 10. Alright, so we're going to continue with contrast. Do a plus 10 there. And that's a new adjustment layer. So you're not making the adjustment directly on the photo. You're using an adjustment layer so you can hide it and you can see how it's affecting other things. You can do combinations of different adjustments at that point. So this is a increased contrast of plus 10. You can see the image change slightly, especially in the textured areas. Contrast is increased by 10. Go back to layer, new adjustment layer, brightness, contrast, and as you can probably guess, contrast of minus 10. Okay, so now we have minus 10 for the contrast, plus 10 for the contrast, minus 10 for the brightness, plus 10 for the brightness, the original image. So if you wanted to see the brightness increased by 10 and the contrast increased by 10, you can put both of those, you can make both of those layers visible, and those adjustments will affect the bottom image. So essentially we have a couple of different scenarios here. We have the original image right out of our camera, then we have a brightness of 10, brightness of minus 10, contrast of plus 10, contrast of minus 10, and then a combination of some of these. You might have contrast of plus 10 and a brightness of minus 10. So you can play with those in any way that you'd like. Now this is important because we're going to save each of these settings as a flattened JPEG in its own folder. That way we can create a contact sheet, print it out, and compare each of our settings to see which one is the very best one that we like. Okay, so next thing we'll want to do is create a couple of JPEGs here. I've already created a folder on the desktop for this, I believe. Let's see. Got way too much stuff going on. Oh, those are some of your shots. Best photos, that's what I called it. Best photos. Should call that print prep or something like that. But we'll call this Frog Original recipe. Make that into a JPEG. You're not overwriting. That's why I did save as. You don't want to lose the PSD. Okay, so now you can do frog plus 10, file, save as, frog, you could say plus 10. That's not a great file name, but it'll work for us. Alright, how about frog minus 10, save as, Don't save the Photoshop files, save it as a JPEG. Okay. The JPEGs will compress the files a little bit. I guess you could save them all as PSDs, but it creates a lot more, a lot larger file size. So I'm just trying to save some file size for a contact sheet. All right, contrast plus 10, file, save as, rinse and repeat here. Frog plus 10. I guess I need to indicate if it's contrast or not. I'll have to rename some of my previous files. Okay, and then frog contrast minus 10. So save as frog minus 10 contrast JPEG. Save. I'll go ahead and redo a couple of these because I think they were put in a different folder and they weren't named appropriately anyway. So no, they're in the same folder. They just need to be named differently. So that's going to be minus 10 bright JPEG. And frog minus 10 plus 10 bright JPEG. I'm going to do a couple more. I'm going to do brightness and contrast increased by 10. Frog plus 10 bright and contrast JPEG. And maybe I'll do one more. A lot of different combinations for these, but you can kind of see how this will benefit you when you're trying to create the very best print possible. Minus 10 bright contrast. Alright, so at this point we can save a raw file. That way we can save these adjustments in case we want to go back and try, you know, plus 20 or plus 5. You know, with each of those we can do whatever we'd like. Okay. Alright, so in our folder we have original image. I'm going to go ahead and, well, we can hold on to that for now. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These ones aren't very descriptive, so I'm going to get rid of them. But now we have minus 10 for brightness, minus 10 for brightness and contrast, minus 10 for contrast, plus 10 for brightness, plus 10 for brightness and contrast, plus 10 for contrast. And then the raw file and the other original file. So both of these will end up looking the same in the contact sheet. Okay, contact sheet. That is a series of thumbnails on one printable page that you can compare. That way you can cross them out. You take a Sharpie marker once you're done with the print. You take a look at it, you compare it to your screen, and you start looking through them and use your eye to weed out the ones that aren't going to work and then to include the ones that you really like and that you know are going to print really well. So we're just trying to bracket our settings to create the best possible print. From here, what you'll want to do is open up Bridge. Bridge has the automate function that used to be in Photoshop versions, but now that's been moved over to Bridge because Bridge is more of a, you know, it's helping to tie programs together. It's also helping to assist in the post-production and, you know, creating portfolios and helping in the post-production process. So what you'll want to do is you want to navigate to your folder that has the images that we were just working on. So week 8, preparing to print, has all of our settings in there. I'm just going to go ahead and leave that folder selected. And if your output window isn't open yet, you can go right up here to this icon, click on this icon, and it'll say output to web or PDF, because that may not be open by default. So you may need to go up here to the top of the window and click on output to web or PDF. So we have all sorts of different prompts in here. We're not going to create a web gallery. We're trying to create a contact sheet so we can test our prints. So PDF, the document, we're just going to keep it on US paper. These are all landscape oriented, so maybe we might print that out as landscape. Quality 300 ppi, definitely. That's what we want. We want the optimal printing resolution. You want to have at least 300. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 images. So what we can do is maybe, you know, 2 columns and 2 rows. You can auto space and rotate for best fit and all that stuff if you want. Don't do 1 photo per page. We want to have multiple photos per page. Actually, let's increase this to 4 columns and 2 rows. That way we have all of our 8 images covered. Overlays, we want the file name in there. We don't need the extension unless we really want it. Now, you could include it, but we don't need it. But we do need the file name. The file name is going to help us know which of the settings that we're looking at, and then that way we know which ones we include, which ones we exclude. In the header, let's say you're running a business, you want to make sure that you can have a header in there that identifies you as a business, or you can identify this as the contact sheet for final project. Doesn't really matter what you put in there, but you just want to make sure that you can identify what you're looking at. All right. You also have a footer in there if you need it. Don't worry about playback. Watermarks are great for businesses. If you need to put a watermark over images that are copyrighted or just for promotional purposes, a watermark would be good for those purposes too. We're not going to put a watermark on ours. I want to view the PDF after saving it. I'm going to click Save. Oh, looks like we need to actually select more than just the folder. We got to select all of our images. All right. PDF. Do I have to do this again? I hope not. If so, that's okay. We get to see it again. All right. It looks like it saved. Looks like it saved all of our previous settings. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. We'll save it as frog print test. And I'll save it in the same folder I've been working with. That way I can keep things organized. If you believe that, I'm trying to stay organized here. And then you just let Bridge do the work for you. We got to tell it a few things so it knows what we're looking for. But how nice is this? At this point, we have a contact sheet. I know they all look the same, but I guarantee they're not, especially upon printing. Each of these has its own title, and we can tell what the settings are for each of these. So we might print this out, and we will X out the ones that just don't have enough contrast or brightness. Maybe they look a little bit dull, or maybe in some cases the brightness of the red is just, it looks too artificial. So we might need to knock that brightness down a little bit. You can always go back in and adjust it for 5 or 3 or whatever you need to do to fine-tune your prints. So at this point you have a print that's pretty well ready to to get printed out and tested. That way, when you go to actually print out an 8 by 10 image, you'll know exactly the settings that you need to put in there without having to do full test print after test print after test print. This will save you a lot of time and a lot of resources as far as paper and ink is concerned. So take your time to do this portion of it first, and I guarantee that you'll have a nice workflow that you're used to using every time you go to print, and you'll have high quality images. You won't have any big surprises when it comes back from the printer. So thank you, and if you have any questions at all, please let me know.